Greetings from Gainesville, Florida, where the swamp has actually been empty for a while, even though the game just ended. Miami 41, Florida 17 in a game that was never close. Miami dominated the entirety of the game, and at this point, you got to be wondering what in the world was Florida doing all offseason when Billy Napier was saying, no, they're getting better. They're better people, and that makes better players. Well, Miami was just going and getting better players. What we saw from Miami is exactly what Mario Cristobal got hired to build, a team that would bully people on the line of scrimmage, which it absolutely did on the offensive line and the defensive line. And then the skill guys they got out of the transfer portal mixing with the ones they developed on their own to produce a blowout win. Cam Ward looked great. Cam Ward, 26 of 35 for 385 yards, 3 touchdowns. There was one ill-advised interception, but he played really well the rest of the game. Xavier Restrepo was outstanding. Little things from guys who came in, Sam Brown, the transfer from Houston. He didn't have the biggest day catching the ball, but he had an incredible block on the goal line to get Mark Fletcher free for a touchdown. Miami made this roster better, and this is what they're supposed to be. This is a team that can compete in the ACC. This is a team that can punish you up front. Miami's probably going to be favored in every game from here on out. We'll see what happens with Florida State. We'll see if Florida State bounces back from the Georgia Tech loss. Maybe they're not. Maybe Miami's not favored in that one. But other than that, Miami will be favored in every game from here on out, and possibly that game too. Florida, meanwhile, they've still got to play Texas A&M. They've got to play UCF. And, worry about that one too. They got to play Kentucky. Worry about that one. Billy Napier's 0-2 against Kentucky. They got to play Tennessee. They got to play Georgia. They got to play Texas. They got to play LSU. They got to play Ole Miss. And they got to play Florida State. What they put on the field on Saturday will not beat any of those teams. Will not beat a single one of those teams. Got a comment in the chat. Is Billy fired after today? No, he's not fired after today. You're not going to fire a coach after game one. But what this tells you is not a lot of improvement was happening. Not a lot of roster construction. We knew that, though. See, that's the thing. They kept saying it was better, but every time I'd ask somebody, why is it better? How is it better? Nobody could point to anything. Nobody could point to, here's a person we got that made it better. So they lose Princely Emmanuel, who was their best edge rusher last year, to Ole Miss. Did they go out and get another good edge rusher? No, they didn't. Ole Miss, which is one of their future opponents, got Princely. Texas, which is one of their future opponents, got Trey Moore from UTSA. Texas A&M, which is a team Florida plays in 2 weeks, got Nick Scorton, who led the Big Ten in sacks last year at Purdue. Who did Florida go out and get? Nobody. Florida lost Trevor Etienne, the running back, to Georgia. You can argue about whether he should have been the number one back over Montrell Johnson. Montrell Johnson had to play the day for Florida with a long touchdown run. Whether that's true or not, whether Trevor Etienne was better than Montrell or not, they let him go to their rival, and they did not do anything to replace him. I'm going to stop you before you say the name DJ Lagway. He came into the game in the fourth quarter, down 4 touchdowns, led him to a touchdown drive, also threw an interception to a guy who was laying on his back. DJ Lagway was not brought in to save the 2024 Florida Gators. He was brought in for a future that at this point, I'm not sure exists. Because if this is what Florida's going to be for the rest of the season, Billy Napier won't be here. And somebody else will be coaching, and DJ Lagway will have to decide, does he want to play for whoever that is, or does he want to go somewhere else? I mean, that's the thing. What you saw here, you could say, oh, Miami's really good. And that's a distinct possibility. Like, Miami could be a great team. This could be a playoff team that Florida lost to on Saturday. The problem is Florida plays 5 or 6 more teams, or possibly more, that are this good or have the potential to be this good. And Florida got bullied on both lines of scrimmage. So what were they doing? What were they doing? If you're not going to go get players out of the portal, you have to develop the ones you have. But Miami was better than them at that. Miami recruited better linemen over the last 2 years. They developed them better. Florida has not been doing that. So that's the problem. That's what Florida runs into right now, is they are in pretty deep trouble. And you can say, oh, they'll bounce back against Stanford, they'll get that W, and they can come back and beat Texas A&M, and all is forgotten. The problem is the product that was on the field today does not stand a chance against Texas A&M. And I say this having not even seen A&M play yet, because they haven't kicked off against Notre Dame. They're going to kick off in a few minutes. But I can tell you right now, Texas A&M is pretty good on both lines of scrimmage, because I've seen them play. I've seen these players play before. If Florida is what it was on Saturday, it can't beat Texas A&M. It can't beat Texas. It probably can't beat UCF. It probably can't beat Ole Miss. It probably can't beat LSU. And it definitely can't beat Georgia. And that's the reality of the situation. So the question I want to know from Billy Napier is, what have you been doing in the 3 years since you started taking Florida's money? What have you done to improve things? Because let's go back. Billy Napier had the number 4 pick in the draft at quarterback and a second-round offensive lineman that he had brought from Louisiana Lafayette that first season. They went 6-7. So they had Anthony Richardson, Osiris Torrance on that offense. They went 6-7. That they also had Ricky Pearsall, who was on last year's team, who was a first-round receiver in this year's draft. And they went 5-7. Who's a first-round draft pick playing on this offense in the 2025 draft? Did you see one out there? I didn't. So if they can't go over 500 with first rounders in the offense, what are they going to do when they have no first rounders? That's where they are now. So again, it begs the question, what were you doing this entire time? Were you just telling everybody it's better, I promise it's better? Meanwhile, Mario Cristobal was actually making his team better. And this is the part where people are going to say, and I know this, there's a brand of Florida fan that's going to say this, but they just bought everybody. Who cares? It's legal. You're allowed to. Everybody else has adjusted, except maybe Dabo Swinney. But that's another topic. And by all means, tune in at midnight as Saturday moves into Sunday. We'll talk about that quite a bit. But everybody else understands, yeah, you got to pay for good players in the transfer portal. You got to pay for good players coming out of high school. It doesn't matter. You're not a lesser team. You're not lesser people. You're not morally bankrupt if you bought better players. You're allowed to buy better players. It's just Florida hasn't, either because they don't have the money, they've chosen not to do it that way. But the fact of the matter is, that's the way it works now. And Miami showed that. Cam Ward was clearly the best quarterback on the field. It wasn't even close. Damian Martinez did a great job. Xavier Restrepo is a guy they brought. Francis Mauigoa, the starting right tackle. He's the highest rated offensive lineman that Miami signed, but they've signed quite a few highly rated offensive linemen since Mario Cristobal got there. But Francis Mauigoa ranks higher than any offensive lineman Florida has signed since Martez Ivey in 2015. Like, this isn't just a Billy Napier problem. This was Billy Napier, Dan Mullen, Jim McElwain. Like, they all had that problem. They've been destroyed in offensive line recruiting. Where do those guys go? They go to Georgia. They go to Alabama. They go to Ohio State. Now they go to Tennessee. David Sanders Jr., the number 1 offensive tackle prospect for the class of 2025. He's going to Tennessee. By the way, that's the team Florida plays. So unless Florida actually starts building this roster better, there's no hope. And that's the thing. Billy Napier and Mario Cristobal were hired within 8 days of each other. Both of them were promised more resources than their programs had ever devoted to football before. And guess what? Mario used it and built what he was supposed to build. Billy didn't. Now, let's look back. And obviously, look, hindsight's 2020. And it is a bit tough for Billy Napier, for Scott Strickland, the athletic director, because this all happened during the period of the most drastic change in the sport that we've ever seen. So everybody was kind of flying blind. But their inability to adapt or adjust keeps coming back to bite them in the ass. But think about this. Just imagine, instead of building this massive staff that Billy Napier built when he got to Florida, someone had gone to Scott Strickland and say, instead of letting Billy do that, why don't you have him just keep the same size staff that Dan Mullen had? Tell the donors, donate that money to the collective. Buy better players with it. Where would Florida be now? They'd be where Miami is. Where's Miami now? They just went on the road and beat the living crap out of somebody. And Florida is a team that got punked at home and now faces the most difficult schedule in the history of college football with a team that isn't equipped for it. Guess we'll see what happens next.